Welcome to the Play Podcast with me, Douglas Schatz. Hello and welcome to episode 102 of the Play Podcast, where we explore the greatest new and classic plays. I'm Douglas Schatz, founder and host of the Play Podcast. There is no curtain to raise in this theatre. The narrator of the play we are about to see is among the audience, greeting them as they assemble, and handing out scraps of paper to selected people, with a number and a few words on them. With other people, the narrator stops for a longer chat. Some upbeat jazz music is playing. When the music fades, the narrator begins their story, starting from when they were 7 years old, and their mother was in hospital, because they had been told she has done something stupid. In fact, the something stupid she has done is to attempt to take her own life. The 7-year-old child decides that day to start a list of everything brilliant about the world, everything worth living for, a list for Mum. This is the premise for Duncan Macmillan's funny and heart-rending one-person show, Every Brilliant Thing. In fact, this is not really a one-person show at all, because although the narrator is telling us the story, the audience also plays an important part in creating the show in every performance. Members of the audience call out items on the list. Several individuals are invited to play characters, and some of the props used in the show are sourced spontaneously from the audience. The one person whose show it has largely been for the last 10 years is comedian, writer, and performer Jonny Donahoe, who is also credited with co-creating the play. The play that Duncan and Jonny created started life at the Ludlow Fringe Festival in 2013, followed by a run at the Edinburgh Fringe the following summer. In the decades since, it has been seen in over 70 countries around the world, and as we record this episode, Every Brilliant Thing has finally reached London's West End, with a rotating cast of 5 different performers appearing as the narrator over its 3-month run at the Soho Place Theatre, including Jonny Donahoe, Lenny Henry, Ambika Maud, Sue Perkins, and Minnie Driver. The always brilliant critic Lyn Gardner described Every Brilliant Thing as one of the funniest plays you'll ever see about depression. She is spot on. It is funny and poignant and finally life-affirming. I'm very privileged to be joined today by the show's 2 creators, Duncan Macmillan and Jonny Donahoe. Welcome, gentlemen. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Before we go further, I must do a very quick proper introduction to you both. Duncan Macmillan's plays include his adaptation of 1984, co-written with Robert Icke, Lungs, his funny and prophetic look at the personal impact of climate change on our everyday lives, which we covered in episode 7 of the podcast, People, Places and Things, his blistering portrait of addiction, which we also talked about on the podcast with Duncan himself and director Jeremy Herron when the play was revived in London last year. Most recently, Duncan wrote the English text for Thomas Ostermeyer's striking adaptations of Ibsen's An Enemy of the People and Chekhov's The Seagull, both of which have been on stage in London recently and which we've also covered on the podcast. So we clearly love the work you do, Duncan. In addition to being the co-creator and original performer of Every Brilliant Thing, Jonny Donahoe also writes and performs with his touring comedy group Jonny and the Baptists. He has written several plays, including Anna Anastasia, 30 Christmases, and Forgiveness, as well as appeared regularly on BBC Radio 4 on the Now Show, Sketchorama, Fresh from the Fringe, and Infinite Monkey Cage, among many others. Okay, so may I start with you, Duncan, and ask you, what was the source of the subject of the play for you? Why did you choose to write about depression and suicide within a family, and particularly from the point of view of a child whose parent attempts suicide?
It's funny, we often joke, me and Jonny, about when you try and explain what this play is to people, it sounds really off-putting. I think that's probably true of all. I was just listening to you describing some of my other plays there, thinking, a couple deciding whether or not to have a baby in the face of climate change. No thanks, I'm busy. And actually, when we were in New York with this, we were talking to a journalist and they were asking us to describe what the play was. And we said, well, it's a sort of one-person show with British sense of humour about suicidal depression with lots of audience participation. And the journalist said, I'm not going to write that because if I write that, no one will come.
Yeah.
It's really hard. I always find it tricky to sort of make a narrative around what the initial impulse, because it's always a number of different things. And you can easily tell a story about it in hindsight. But I think really the original gestation of it came out of my very first play that was on at Theatre 503 in 2005. I had an amazing actress in it called Rosie Thompson, and she had no lines, and for most of the play she had her back to the audience. So on the final night, she came up to me and took my head in her hands and just said, "I've loved doing this, but you owe me." Yeah. And then that same week, the guys at the Miniaturists, who used to run this festival at the Arcola of short, brand new plays, they asked if I'd want to do one, and I thought, I'll write a monologue for Rosie. And I wrote the first short story that Every Brilliant Thing then became over time. I wrote it for her, and it was a sort of 15, 20-minute condensed version without any audience participation, but which told the story of this list. I suppose, as we talked about with People, Place and Things, I think I watched a lot of plays when I was younger, and when I realised that new writing was a thing. Before that, I just thought all playwrights were dead.
Oh, long dead.
But to know that was something people still did, I went to see a lot of sort of in-your-face plays in the mid and late 90s. And there's a lot of plays which sort of make, Ibsen is one for this as well, that make suicide a sort of romantic, inevitable gesture. And I couldn't find a play which felt more truthful to me in the sense that depression in general is actually much more common. It's an experience which touches all of us. And it's quite hard to make drama out of that, about the ordinary and the everyday, but it felt like a worthwhile thing. And over time, with Sleeve Notes, the short story, and then as it became Every Brilliant Thing, we sort of realised that actually having someone stand up in front of a group of people and talk about their mental health and talk about mental health in general and be okay was actually a really interesting and maybe worthwhile thing to do, to model that talking about this stuff is helpful and to create a community where you can feel seen and that you're showing up for someone, very much like the impulse behind People, Place and Things, which was written sort of concurrently to this.
If it's not too personal a question, did your interest in depression or even suicide come from any personal experience that sparked your interest in writing the story in the first place and then the play?
I mean, sure. I mean, I think you'd be hard pushed to find anyone who hasn't had either directly, personally, or knows someone or loves someone, lives with someone, works with someone who hasn't experienced that. And I think what's interesting about revisiting this play, actually that short story written in 2005, so it's literally 20 years on. But I think in that time, wouldn't you say, Jonny, we've got so much better as a society at talking about this sort of stuff?
I think so. Yes, I feel I have mixed feelings on where we've gone. I think it is part of the national conversation and it is accepted. But I also think it used to be a case that I would say, well, I'm doing this show and it's about these things. And people would they'd zip up with a kind of like, oh well, I don't want to hear about it. And now I say it and people go, oh, yes, it's very important to talk about. And it's still actually quite similar. Because, when you come back to something, there's a real sort of fear that it existed of a moment. And so last year, when we brought the show back, Duncan and I got back in the room and hammered out how to put it back on stage and make sure it was still, relevant and beautiful and all the things that I think it is. And there wasn't a huge amount of work, I think, to do. I mean, Duncan's very precise with language and especially with things that are vital. It's so important to talk about suicide and depression with extreme care and confidence. And so there's lots of little things, but actually the thrust of the play has changed in no way whatsoever because it's still equally relevant and vital. And that thing you said at the start, by the way, I'm delighted every time you mention the story of Rosie, that essentially this is a play born out of guilt.
They all are.
Yeah, that's all art, isn't it? In some way. But yes, I'm very aware of Ibsen as a really good example of the romanticization of suicide. And one of the best things about this play is that it is about being quite undramatic about something that is so absolute and important, but is so common and so important to talk about. And I think every time I do the show, I love it again because it's a play that works by breaking every single rule. Almost everything happens in the past tense. It's not direct action. It's not happening right in front of you. We're retelling a story, but it is told from a place of safety, security, and it's inherently dramatic regardless of that. And it takes you on a journey. It transports you, but it also does the right thing, which is to talk about these things in a safe way. There's a section in it where the narrator reads the actual Samaritan's guidelines, and almost every performer who's ever engaged with the script has at some point said, can we cut that? It's so inert.
Oh, no.
And yet it's not.
No.
It's incredibly dramatic and it's so vital. The show doesn't hold up without it. It's so important. And perhaps that's the thing behind all of it, which is, yes, it's a one-person show. Who wants to see them? It's got huge amounts of audience interaction. Oh, I can't stand that. It's about suicide and depression, which is just too awful to deal with. You know, there's usually a sort of pudgy British bloke running around being cheerful and also a bit sarky. I mean, who wants to see that? For me, the thing I always love about it the most is that the central theatrical metaphor is so visible that it's about the room.
Yeah.
That it's about sharing a story in a circle.
Yeah.
That it's about seeing people's reactions, and that the only answer to depression is to share. And that's what we insist upon from the start.
Yeah. It makes it inclusive, doesn't it?
That's right.
One of the things that's distinctive about the play is that it's from the perspective of the child, which is very particular, I think, and as part of its appeal emotionally, and certainly when the audiences I've seen embrace this story and embrace the emotional journey and impact on the young person, makes it more effective and immediate in some ways, even though it's indirect, because the person who's suffering we don't see. I want to talk about so much of what you've just said, Jonny, the form and the messages in the play. That piece about the Samaritan's guidelines we'll come to a bit later. For listeners who haven't seen the show and may not get a chance to while it's now on in London, I wonder if between you could give us a brief outline of the story in the play. Now, I hasten to say that for anyone who will be going to the show, our conversation today will include spoilers, so you can choose to turn off now and come back and listen later, or take your chances. But could we just give a little bit of a synopsis of what happens through the play with this character, this narrator? Who wants to kick that off?
Yeah, let's try. I mean, the story is pretty slight in a way. It's the story of a list. I mean, it's sort of intentionally. It's the story of a list which is being described in hindsight by someone in the present, looking back on when it began as a child, when they were essentially quite neglected by both parents after their mother had tried to take her own life, and they were told that she can't see anything worth living for. So through a very young, naive, lovely point of view, the child thinks, well, I'll just write them down. I'll write down the things that are worth living for. And it doesn't work.
Well, it does and it doesn't work.
It doesn't work. It takes on a different sort of purpose as the play goes on. And so, as you understand from the very first line, the list began after her first attempt. That first attempt isn't her only attempt. And so the narrator then describes how, as a teenager, their mother attempted suicide again, and then in that moment, they found the list and thought, oh, my younger self dealt with this so much better. Of course, it was naive, but it was hopeful, and maybe that's better than just getting angry. And so they try again. And the list keeps coming back into their life in different ways. In later life, it shifts its focus to becoming a gift for the person they're falling in love with. And then it becomes ultimately a present that they leave for their father. And it's sort of just a way of talking about, as we said, this very common, this shared experience of loving someone who experiences depression, and also sort of reckoning with your own mental health struggle. But as I say, the story is quite slight intentionally, because it's almost like a parable in some ways. Yeah. And it's almost kind of magical realist in some ways. The idea of reaching a million things, which is, spoiler alert, what the list concludes as, is sort of impossible. I think the complete works of Shakespeare is under 1 million words. So it's an enormous sort of lifelong task.
Yeah. And there are nights where he or she writes several thousand in like minutes, which is beautiful but impossible. But that's
because actually ultimately it's really about the experience, the sort of communal experience of sharing this story and collectively co-authoring the story as an audience, as a collective. I can't remember how many cards we hand out, but I think there's 70 something.
Yeah, it's 77.
There's then 5 or 6 principal characters that are cast from the audience. There's moments in different shows. There's a version in Sue's version where audience members will get up and dance on stage potentially at one point. So there's different ways of interacting with people. And really, what I find really joyful to watch in it myself is that people are sort of wonderful.
Yeah.
Regular people are sort of, when given the chance to be compassionate and kind and funny and spontaneous, it's really magnificent to watch. I mean, one of the joys of bringing it back this time, and sorry that I'm answering about 12, Jonny's the same, we're answering about 12 questions all in one. One of the joyful things about coming back to it over 10 years on for this West End run has been reaching out to people who've performed it all around the world and hearing some of their stories. I was talking to Nanda Mohammed, who's performing it currently in Cairo in Arabic, and she told this amazing story about how she was going through some personal issues, bereavement in her own life, and she was performing the play, and she got to the second Mrs. Patterson scene, who's a character you cast from the audience, who plays a sort of school counsellor who looks after her when she's a little girl, and then when she's an adult, she calls this person back in this sort of moment of madness, just reconnects with this person, and just says, I'm really sad, I'm really unhappy, and I don't know what to do. And apparently in one performance, the Mrs. Patterson that she'd cast just said, oh, remember your list. You've got to hold your list with you and carry on with your list. Number 1. And then the person with number 1 yelled out number 1. And then spontaneously the person with number 2 shouted. And then the entire audience, everyone who had an entry to read out, started shouting out their list entries.
Spontaneously, the narrator usually has to give them the cue, and this just happened.
Absolutely, but that was a member of the public who hadn't read the script, understanding perfectly in that moment what the gesture was, and creating a spontaneous moment that will never happen again in any other performance, and which allowed everyone else in that moment to participate. And hearing stories about this production from all around the world, everyone has a story like that, of a member of the public who is unscripted, who isn't an actor, just doing something really wonderful and showing up for this central character. And we know it's a fiction, but they still can be moments where they're just compassionate and funny and lovely and spontaneous in a moment which just absolutely crushes me, which I could never have scripted.
I want to talk about the interactivity in a second, but the list is certainly a brilliant conceit. It's so simple in some ways, but it's a symbol for the joy that we can all feel in just being alive, and the small things, the ordinary things. There's so many great ordinary things on the list. I was tempted to ask you guys if you had a favorite thing from the play itself that's on the list.
Oh, good question.
It changes all the time.
Things like vinyl records, the smell of old books, Nina Simone's voice.
Ah, yes. For every night, there's a moment where we play about 8 seconds or so of Nina Simone's voice, and I get to just stand and listen to it, even though I'm at work. I'm literally being paid during those 8 seconds. That's really wonderful. The other thing is they change. So there's lots of list entries that have existed from the very first time the play was ever performed, but there's also ones that have constantly changed. And Duncan, when you were rehearsing in Lenny and Sue and Ambika, you wanted them to have things that represented their background and also their age and the lives they would have had. And that's wonderful. But also, we changed some of mine. We just added in Keanu Reeves.
Universally brilliant.
Universally brilliant human being.
For some reason, that gets a big laugh.
Well, because of doing this weird job, Duncan and I have met a lot of famous people, which is a strange thing. And they're usually perfectly nice, but they're very seldom normal. And the ability to reach that level of success and maintain that level of kindness is so extraordinary, and everyone has spotted that. I mean, I remember once he was asked, what happens to you when you die? And he said, I don't know, but I know the people who loved you miss you.
Oh, nice. I'm going to interrupt you there, Jonny. Sorry, because we're going down a rabbit hole at Keanu
No,
Reeves.
we are. We've lost the play.
I was going to ask Duncan for one favorite, maybe.
Please.
Off the top of your head.
Yeah, they're different for each performer as well, and sometimes different from show to show. I'm really struggling with it because they have different functions. What you're looking for sometimes is that sort of of recognition, or it's just very funny. But they should be something that we recognise that we don't necessarily always have draw attention to. One I really like is that point in a friendship where it becomes okay for someone to take chips off your plate without asking. I really like that moment because I'm quite a boundaried person, but I also really love my friends, and I tell my friends that I love them. And there's something about having got somewhere where you can take chips off their plate without asking, but you just see this hand coming over and just lifting a chip off your plate, and you feel like, yes, we have got to that point in a friendship where you know that I know that that's okay, and you don't need to ask.
So there's a similar one, isn't there, where you know someone well enough to get them to check your teeth for broccoli?
Yeah, it's a very intimate thing.
I think the list is such a great symbol of collectivity in some ways, of the things that we share.
That's right. Yeah.
We recognize, as you just said, that others love some of the things that we do. And I also thought it was interesting that you said about the million items, because I was struck by the title, Every Brilliant Thing. Now that, of course, is impossible. It's an infinite list of every brilliant thing, which means I think also that it's very much a work in progress,
Yes.
which is also part of the point that we keep adding to it. It's literally to be continued, which is part of the theme from the start, of course, that the list, if you keep adding, you're still alive. You keep living, you keep noticing and enjoying what's around you.
Yeah.
Now, we talked about the interactivity. I want to talk about the form of the play some more a little bit. Firstly, Duncan, was it always a monologue? And why is it better than with other characters on the stage? And when did it become interactive? And what do you think the interactivity adds to it?
It was always a monologue, and part of that is what Jonny was talking about. Putting it in past tense is, you'd never suggest a writer puts a narration in past tense, because drama exists in the present. What makes something dramatically interesting is watching characters making decisions live in the moment, with a time pressure and with a window of opportunity to do it, and with clear stakes. And it's kind of a perverse instinct maybe for a dramatist to sort of remove the drama from something, but it felt really important to show someone actually not... What you don't want in this production is to watch a really great actor struggling and being in huge pain and taking the focus. Actually, it's sort of a very, as you said, kind of a democratic experience. It's a shared experience, and their experience is something that we are all going through and we're all sharing and relating to, and actually they're fine, they're okay, they're in the present tense, they're doing the work. They're recounting a painful story at times, and it's sometimes funny, but they're actually okay, and that was really important. And so coming from that, the formal gesture of the show always felt like, well, the audience should see each other, they should be able to hear each other, we should leave the house lights up all the way through so everyone can remain in the same room together. We're sort of building a community of people. One of my favourite entries actually is a new one, which is right at the end, where the fact that any group of strangers can, albeit briefly, become a choir. Yeah. And I love that in funerals, I love that in concerts, I love that experience. And during the pandemic, during lockdown, I felt like I really missed that experience, that theatre. It's sort of theatre's superpower, that we go into a room with a group of strangers and then we come out as a sort of collective in some way.
I just wondered about, because that's a new line in this year or last year. But do you remember we saw that production in Greek?
Oh, yeah.
Where we went to see this wonderful performer called Melina Theo, and I think she'd adapted it for Greek and Cypriot audiences, and they were performing it in London, and we went to see it. And obviously, Duncan and I don't speak any other language, but we were able to follow really well, and it was beautifully taught. You could tell it was good. But there was a moment where they just all started singing.
Twice.
And that's not in the show.
The entire audience sang 2 entire songs.
And it was so moving.
So they became a choir.
They did.
Yeah, exactly. And we said to Melina afterwards, do they always sing that song at that moment? And she said, well, they always sing, and they'll always sing at some point, but it's always a different song at a different moment. And that sort of, as you were asking about the interactivity, the short story Sleeve Notes was always funny as well as sad. And when I thought about adapting that short story into a longer play, I really struggled with it becoming too literal, about having a 7-year-old actor and seeing an actor playing the mother and seeing like literal scenes playing out. That never felt right. And when I went to see Jonny performing with his band, Jonny and the Baptists, I thought, well, if it could be more like this, if it could be a fun, joyful, shared experience where we talk about difficult things and it doesn't feel tense and it doesn't feel uncomfortable, it feels authentic and sincere and fun and truthful. And that was the tightrope, I suppose, to walk, where it's not too bleak, yet we're being truthful and sincere and accurate about talking about mental health, depression and suicide, but also that it's not too mawkish and sentimental on the other side. That felt like the challenge and the sort of the game of it. And then involving the audience, involving them as cast members, involving them shouting out list entries. I mean, partly that was always baked into this version of it because of Jonny and his particular way of using the crowd and talking to the audience. And also it was in those first showings in Ludlow and Ledbury that were supposed to be the only times we'd ever perform this play. There wasn't enough time in the build-up for Jonny to learn the entire script. So we sort of prioritised him learning certain aspects of it and then relied on the audience for telling other bits of the story. And then I'd written in the very first long draft I'd written for Jonny things like, this is a real spoiler alert, but Mrs. Patterson would have a sock puppet. And Jonny had said to me, I think she will take off her own sock and use that. And I said, that's never going to happen. And he said, trust me, I can get Mrs. Patterson to take off her sock. And so far, very few people have refused to do that.
It's almost never.
But it felt better to do something where if we're going to cry, we're all crying together. And if we're going to laugh, we're all laughing together. And it's about creating a sense of community and a sort of democratization. That central actor is sort of almost conducting the experience. Rather than taking up all the space and making it about them, it's actually making the audience the heroes of the show.
I mean, it's extraordinary the way the performer gains that trust, as Jonny has, that the person will take their sock off. But I think it's not true also to say that it's not dramatic. There is a sense of what's going on behind the narrator's life, right? About what's happening with his or her mother and how that's impacting his life and how his or her life is unfolding.
No, it's inherently dramatic. It's just breaking all the rules. So it shouldn't be. It is literally a sort of blow-by-blow account of how not to write a drama.
But the interactivity creates such a great energy and even joy, I'd say, for an audience together. I mean, you also become engaged, tied to the well-being of this person. You become, I think it says somewhere, the support group. The audience are turned into a support group of sorts. And what goes on in the process is an individual reaching out and connecting to other people in the world, which is what is salutary, which is healing for this individual character. Because what we recognize is they spend a lot of their time carrying the fear and the stress and the pain and the sadness of what's going on in their lives alone, and even hide it from other people. And in this experience, it comes out, and we are part of the process of healing.
That's exactly right. And I think, it's theatre's superpower. I think it's the same thing. I was writing this concurrently with People, Place and Things, and it's a similar conclusion, which is depression, like addiction, is a sort of isolating illness. And the best way through it is with other people. And talking and listening and, a central gesture of the play is if you need help, ask for it. And if you're asked for help, give it. And to see people stepping up and doing that, members of the public doing that during the play is really, really moving. So why I say the story is slight, it's because the experience that you have, hopefully as an audience member, that's the point. That sort of coming together as a collective and showing up for someone telling this story and laughing and crying and empathizing with that person. That's the central gesture of the show. And I hope it reduces a bit of the stigma and the taboo about if you're reticent about seeking help yourself, or if you're uncomfortable talking about other people in your family, friends, colleagues. Hopefully it will make that a little less difficult.
I'm sure. And Jonny, I want to ask you specifically about these interactions with the audience, because I know you're a master at this. And there must be many memorable encounters that you've had with the people, particularly who are invited to play the characters. You mentioned the primary school counselor who has to take her sock off. And actually, his first thing she's asked to do is tell a joke, right? Spontaneously. And then there's the narrator's father, who finds himself at one stage in the center of the stage, handed a microphone and asked to give a wedding toast. And I remember this, chaps, from my very first seeing of the show back in Edinburgh in 2014. And I was absolutely terrified at that point on behalf of that person. And I certainly didn't want to be that person who spontaneously has to come up and give a wedding toast. But somehow you managed to gain their trust. And I've seen some amazing performances, as you just say. Some people just step up and actually you just take it and go. So tell me about some of the best and maybe even some of the more challenging ones you've had, Jonny.
I mean, I've done it enough to have a broad spectrum of responses. They have mostly been good. I mean, 99% of them have been extraordinarily wonderful. I think the key to it is to come back to that thing we said earlier, which is generosity, which is the play's intention is to be generous. And it speaks to Duncan, not just as an artist, but as a person. I mean, I love working with Duncan, and it was only going to be 3 weeks, and it's been 12 years. But the truth is that he is an inherently generous person, and both the story has a generosity to it that is unusual in art, and the form does. Most writers wouldn't be comfortable with the idea of saying, well, here's the play, but off you go. You can change as much as you need to in the moment. There's an extreme generosity to that. That generates something in the room. It's like that is sort of burnt into the fibre of the piece, creates something that allows all the other blocks to build upon it. And so whenever we've talked to other people who performed it, you can see why it's worked, because they've got that inbuilt into them as well. And whenever a performer has a go at it who doesn't have that generosity, the play can't really land in the same way. You have to be sharing and loving and generous. And so when you ask somebody, if I said to you, well, at some point in the play, I'm going to come over to you, put a microphone in your hand, and you're going to have to give a 4-minute speech. I mean, that's awful. But every aspect of the play building up to that moment allows that bit to be natural and generous and gentle. And all of the interactions are built around things that you're already going to understand. So usually the person who represents the dad from the audience, who sort of gets cast into that role, is probably someone older who maybe has been at a number of weddings, may have had a child get married, or has certainly been to enough to know the form. And the interaction with the sock puppet is just so immediately clear to somebody that you know how to do it.
Yeah, the rules are clear.
The rules are so clear and they're so generous. And it's the opposite of the kind of heckling and baiting that happens often in comedy clubs. What we're asking always, both when I'm performing it or anyone else performing it, and Duncan on the page, every intention is be better than us and we'll be proud of you, not let me shine. The best show is when you're not the star of it.
You're setting them up to be the hero.
Yes, I think that interesting about the spirit that's created where people just naturally become generous and kind. I was really struck by the person who I saw in London who became the primary school counselor, how absolutely in the moment she was responding with complete kindness and sympathy, really talking to this young child in front of her, essentially, and her own language. It was her own words and her own emotion. And that was hugely impressive. And as you say, it creates the environment for her to feel that naturally.
I suppose it's when you sort of try and find people to cast, I'm looking for somebody who is open to things, not somebody who is interested in showing off.
Yeah.
So the person who is desperately keen to do it is as dangerous as the person who's terrified. You look for someone in between the two.
Yeah. You might never get the microphone back.
Yeah, that's the worry, isn't it? But I think the fact that it keeps being performed and it goes on all around the world and it keeps coming back in different forms, sort of, all over and in different languages, is because there is a hunger to want to share, that we live in a world that doesn't allow us that shared community sense. And we think we don't want it, but as soon as we're given just a tiny little nod in the direction of it, everyone comes with us. And that's because there's a hunger for it, there's desire to commune, to share, to be a part of something. And it's natural, and that's all you tap into.
Yeah, I was going to ask you actually very specifically, Jonny, Sam, the narrator's love interest and later married partner, who could be, it says in the text, male or female, and of course the narrator could be male or female.
Yeah, or non-binary.
Or non-binary, and there are any combinations as a couple there. But also there's a stage direction in the text that says they kiss. What happens at that point, Jonny?
I don't think the stage direction says they kiss.
Oh, is it just said we kissed?
It's we kissed. So I think that's a very clear distinction.
Okay,
so
yeah, it is.
It isn't the case that they kiss, it's that they have kissed. And in telling the story, I share with that person live in the moment that me and the person they represent have now kissed.
Okay.
And I think that's a really key, because consent is so important. And so when I go around talking to people at the start of the show, the three things I want to share with them, I want to learn who they are. So I'm just chatting and getting a sense of it. But the three things, I want to know your pronouns and make sure that I gender you correctly and you feel comfortable in that environment. I want to make sure that you are happy to do something. And then lastly, most importantly, is do you know what we talk about in this play? That we're going to touch upon these things, that we're going to talk about suicide and depression. And are you comfortable having a conversation about those things? Once you've got those three things out the way, you have a pretty good idea of how that person feels about the whole, and it's then quite easy. But no, we don't kiss.
Okay, so I misquoted that one.
Well, Kaki Teodoro in the Philippines does kiss her Sams, but it's always with consent. I've had this conversation with her. She insists that it's specified in the text. I've said there's no stage direction.
I would say it's very clear it's not in the text. And I think for different people and their different persona on stage, that can be quite different. I have had members of the audience kiss me during that moment, which I feel there's a sort of inherent consent in that I am asking you to go out of your comfort zone, so there's no reason I shouldn't do the same.
So they've fallen in love with you, Jonny.
I think it's happened a lot. There's a performer called Ben Target who came and watched the show, and I asked him to be Sam, and he was very taken with it, and he was very moved. He was in a lot of tears during the love story, and it was very powerful. And then at the end of the show, not at the kiss moment, but when I went to take a bow, I want to thank all the people who've been a part of the cast. So I sort of take a curtain call with them all. And at that point, he gave me a full on-the-lips snog. We know each other very well, but the room kind of erupted in excitement. And that was a really gorgeous. So that's my best kiss.
Great. I'm glad I asked the question in the end then. I quoted Lyn Gardner at the beginning saying the play is one of the funniest that you ever see about depression, and the interactions with the audience are very funny, but the tone of the piece is beautifully modulated, as I think you suggested at the beginning, Duncan, because the narrator always brings us back to the central fact of the story, that their mother attempts to kill herself more than once. So there are also serious points made, and one of the most telling points is when the narrator, and you touched on this, Jonny, talks about the way suicide is presented in film or the media, and they cite the guidelines that the Samaritans publish for how the media should report on suicide. And I wonder, Jonny, if I might prevail on you to recite those rules, if you have them at the top of your head for us, because I think they are important messages to take away from the play, and it's not undramatic. It's very powerful in its moment.
So these are the Samaritans' media guidelines for how suicide should be reported responsibly.
Avoid dramatic headlines, terms like suicide epidemic or hotspot. Avoid sensationalist pictures or video. Avoid excessive detail. Avoid using the word commit. Don't describe death by suicide as successful. Don't publish suicide notes. Don't publish on the front page. Don't ignore the complex reality of suicide and its impact on those left behind. Include references to support groups, places like the Samaritans. Don't speculate on the reason. I mean, that's crucial. Don't supply simplistic reasons like he'd lost his job or she'd recently become bankrupt. We can never truly know why.
That's brilliant. Thank you. As I said, I think that's extraordinarily powerful, even more so in context with the way the tone of the play works. One of the other serious points I thought was most affecting about the play is the picture we get, as I said, I think earlier, of the impact on the narrator of living with the ups and downs of their mother's behavior. It inevitably affects their personality, their behavior, their outlook on the world. Doesn't it, Duncan? I wondered, how do you see the parent's trauma manifest in the life and development of the child as it's expressed in the play?
That's a big question. I mean, there's all sorts of studies. One of them is cited in the play as well about having emotionally unavailable or inconsistent depressed parents can actually change your brain chemistry. But really, it's more important by that point that we're watching someone who is trying to reckon with their own mental health and work out what to do about it. And actually, context is really important. But you don't want to get into a sort of blame game by that point. As an adult, you want to sort of say, okay, how can I take responsibility for my own behavior and actions and thought processes? And how can I make things easier for myself and those around me? And I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not really equipped to talk about the impact of all of that stuff. What I am interested in is modeling someone talking about it in healthy ways.
And it's interesting, though, there was some indication of the challenges that he or she may feel as a result, talking about, even in functional terms, that for example, that really telling detail that their school lunchbox was empty because mom wasn't up to making a lunch and having to hide that fact. Or then also that happiness scared him because it was usually followed by the reverse in what he's seen. So he couldn't believe anything being stable, to stay good. I wanted to stay constant, he said. And I think in the latest script, he said, I was so grateful to be ordinary at one point. So it doesn't want these fluctuations, extremes. All that was, I thought, extremely poignant. Of course, Inherent in Mum's struggles, the struggle between hopelessness and hope is there, right? As Dad says when they're driving to the hospital after Mum's first attempt, in order to live in the present, we have to be able to imagine a future that will be better than the past. That's what hope is. And without hope, we couldn't go on. In some sense, the story that unfolds pulls no punches, but there is some hope in the play as well, isn't there? What do you think, guys?
Hugely.
I think so, yeah. I mean, I think Jonny and I both very much believe that life is worth living.
Massively.
And I hope that's the general feeling that you leave the theatre having reinforced.
But I think one of the most hopeful aspects of the play is that it is inherently about somebody who wants things to be different, things to be better. Mm-hmm. The real dad in the story deals with this situation by immersing himself in music and hiding. And the narrator spends a lifetime trying and often failing, but always trying to do something else. And I also think one of the things that resonates massively for me, I mean, Duncan and I both now have children and didn't when this started. Is that true?
Well, mine had just been born.
That's right, yeah. And one of the things I love is that the narrator by the end is trying to model a better life for themselves and a better future without having had that necessarily given to them by their parents. But there isn't a sense of blame. That the two things you have to try and do is be better than the generation before you and not be angry with them. That's sort of what I'm trying to live my life by. And I feel it's very much in the play, and it's very much in how a lot of the people I'm very proud of live their lives. I think that is inherently just the most hopeful thing you can do, is to keep living and try and do it a bit better.
Yeah, there's a great line. The narrator says, he has some advice for anyone contemplating suicide. Don't do it. Things get better. They may not always get brilliant, but they get better. It can be hard to believe, I'm sure, at times. And it may not be as simple as the list of brilliant things, but it can get better. And the show that I saw, I think the music at the end, there's a lyric that goes, things are going to get easier.
That's right. Ooh, child, things are going to get easier. Things are going to get brighter.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Well, on that positive note, thank you so much, gentlemen. Before I let you go, one of the traditions of the podcast is that I like to ask my guests to recommend another play that we might cover in the podcast. Really, it's just a chance to hear what some of your favorite plays are. Last time we were together, Duncan, you nominated Slave Play by Jeremy Harris.
Oh, did I? Interesting.
But I'm going to challenge you once more and ask you each to come up with one play off the top of your head that you love to share with our listeners.
I loved reading and then seeing, which I did in that order, 7 Methods of Killing Kylie Jenner by Jasmine Lee Jones. Seeing that on the page made me feel... I always think that I've only just left the Young Writers Programme at the Royal Court, and actually I'm just one of those guys. And then I felt a generation shift when I read that, and I saw it on the page with all these sort of images and like how she captured the internet. The central sort of political provocations in that play I thought was so well thought through and so clearly threaded. It was such a funny, such an angry, such an incredibly brave, clear-sighted bit of writing that just made me think, oh, you can completely reinvent what theatre is and what playwriting is. And I love everything Jazz has written, and she's just a sort of one-of-a-kind generational talent. So, yeah, she'd be interesting to talk to, and that play would be interesting to look at, I think.
Yeah, so that's great. I'd love to do that. I have it on the shelf. I'm really disappointed I missed it at the theatre, but you're right that the Royal Court can still keep producing this.
Absolutely.
Generation after generation is fabulous. Jonny, how about you?
Well, I'm going to go for something a bit older because I've just reread it and it changed my week, which is An Intervention by Mike Bartlett. I think it's not his most heralded play. I don't think it's been performed a great deal. It's an extraordinary piece on friendship and politics and real love between two friends. And I'd sort of forgotten about it, and then I came back to it. But the reason it perhaps hasn't been performed a great deal is because, perhaps unlike myself, Mike writes a new play every 6 or 7 hours, and they're always going on. And so as a result, a play that's a few years old is kind of 30 plays ago because he's so extremely prolific. But I loved that play.
That's a great recommendation. It's interesting that there's so many plays that can sort of disappear a little bit because there's new stuff coming all the time. But I love to be reminded of those. Thank you very much. Okay, so Every Brilliant Thing continues at the Soho Place Theatre with its changing cast until the 8th of November 2025, including 4 more performances, I think, Jonny, by yourself.
Yes, I'm back.
From the 9th to the 11th of October. Go now if you can, because you never know, you might not keep doing it for the next 10 years. Great. Thank you so much, gentlemen. It's great to see you.
Thanks, Douglas.
As the curtain falls on the boxes containing the list of 1 million brilliant things, we know, as the narrator did, that such a list is not a cure-all. But the list and the play remind us that we are not alone in those cherished little things that we have in common and in the mental challenges that we may face. Perhaps in moments when we begin to be clouded by doubt or despondency, we might stop and think about adding 1 or 2 brilliant things of our own to the list. I have one: seeing a brilliant play live in the theatre.
Oh.
Thanks for listening. See you next time. There are additional footnotes about this and every other play that we cover in the podcast available to our patrons. Patrons also enjoy early access to our sister podcast, The Play Review, in which Jody Rylett and I share our views on current productions on the London stage. To become a patron, please visit our website at theplaypodcast.com. And don't forget to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts so as not to miss an episode. Thank you again for listening. See you next time.